9:30. Let's remind you about our top stories. Thousands of commuters are stranded as Metrorail's National Day of Protest intensifies. As you just heard, Auditor General Kimi Makwetu is expected to be in the hot seat at the Alexandra inquiry. South Africa will today bid a final farewell to the music legend Johnny Clegg in a public memorial service in Sandton. The search continues for about 150 people who are feared to have died in a shipwreck off the coast of Libya. And this is the big one in your sports news. The countdown to this year's Carling Black Label Cup continues as the starting lineup has been confirmed. Well, businessman and former farmer Willie Basson will continue his testimony at the state capture inquiry today due to concerns with the interpreter. His testimony yesterday was cut short. The commission is probing allegations that hundreds of millions of rands allocated to black emerging farmers were diverted to companies linked to the Guptas. Basson farmed near Vrede in the Free State and in an area where the controversial Estina Dairy Farm is located. He's told the commission that he's met the three of the Gupta brothers at the Estina farm. Mangoba Mkunu is our man on the ground following this story very carefully and very closely. It is interesting testimony coming from this stream of evidence being led at the commission. Let's go back before we go to Willie Basson. Talk about Dr. Khadebe. You mentioned some very interesting things. He was a former DA councillor in the area at the time, and he was speaking about back in the 90s, there were about 30 dairy farms there. When this project was mooted, he said there were only about 3. Talk us through his testimony. What stood out?
Of course, what you were saying, Glenn, is because of the financial problems that most of the dairy farms had been facing at the time. Many of them obviously closed business because they were making a loss. And so when this opportunity of the Vrede Dairy project was presented to them, it seemed like something that would be an economic boost or a cash injection for most of those farmers. And of course, the poor emerging farmers who were struggling at the time. So that's why he says they bought into the idea. But before that, he says, Mosebenzi Zwane, of course, implicates him again here, saying that Mosebenzi Zwane came through our council meeting on the 19th of June. And he says he hijacked that meeting because he was not even on the agenda. We had to wait for 2 hours to actually listen from Mosebenzi Zwane. And he says during that meeting, that's where the idea of the Vrede farm was presented to them. And of course, we recall, Plain, that, the land, the piece of land, the 4,000 hectares of land where that dairy farm project is currently housed belongs to that municipality, the Pumelela municipality.
Right.
And at that time, it was being leased by some of the farmers in the area who were paying something of about R1 million annually to this farm as a profit to the municipality. So the municipality was generating revenue from this particular farm. But now he says that when Mosebenzi Zwane came with his team, of course the presentation they made at that time is that they're going to bring about 400,000 investment, 300,000 which will be the money from the department, which will be invested into this program over 3 years, 100 million each year, and then of course 100 million for the beneficiaries. And they said at the time they'd identify about 100 beneficiaries who are going to benefit 100 million. And then he said 500,000 of that money, 500 million will come from Estina through a company called Paras. But of course we know now all of that didn't materialize. But again, I think interestingly, Plain, the municipality also losing its revenue because you remember that, the municipality eventually gave up the land to the agriculture department, and the agriculture department gifted this land to the Gupta linked company Estina for 99 years rent free. So the R1 million that they were getting from this farm, again, that revenue was cut short. But let's take a listen to how he implicates the then former agriculture MEC, Mosebenzi Zwane.
Mr. Zwane first spoke and told us that they've earmarked Vrede to establish a dairy farm whereby there will be a milk processing plant. So they were in the council to ask the council to give them permission to lease that land, which is Kreulele last in Vrede. Then thereafter, Mr. Tabete came with the representation, but he never gave us any written documents. He was just doing it orally. That's when they said there is a company which is called Estina, who will work in partnership with a certain company in England, which is the big company in milk processing plant in England.
Did they say in England?
I mean in India. The name of the company is Paras.
So Mr. Vrede was also speaking about the cattle when it was bought about 2013, and then he got a report in 2014 that some of this cattle was actually dying, and it was being dumped allegedly in a stream, a river that was used for drinking water. He said there was about not less than 45 carcasses that was in the stream. So he reported it to the media, and then he reported to the environmental affairs, but he got some backlash. He was attacked personally, he said, after reporting this to the media. Who did he finger in this regard?
Of course, Blaine, recall that this has been the narrative by some of those whistleblowers in this particular venture. You recall, of course, we had the testimonies of those intended beneficiaries of how they've been threatened with death and how they've been intimidated. And again, this DA councillor is saying that it's the same with him. After reporting that to the media and exposing it to the media, he got death threats. He says even the community members where he comes from were very violent against him. You know, they were very angry at him for exposing this thing. And of course, he says that there was a group of henchmen or so-called special force of the then Agriculture MEC that he had appointed. And he said he appointed these 5 people shortly after he became the Agriculture MEC. And he says these are the people that are really carrying out the attacks, the intimidation. And he says at one point he too was attacked by this group. And he says he was attacked, he was pepper sprayed by this group, and he went to the police station. But I think, Blaine, what was more disappointing for him, he says, is the fact that, you know, the police didn't do anything. In fact, they didn't open a case for him. Again, the Vrede police station being dragged into this. You recall the intended beneficiary, Ephraim Dlamini, who said that, you know, when he faced death threats, when he had a video of people saying that they're going to kill him, and he took that to the police. Nothing till this day has been done. And again, the same evidence that Vrede is saying is that when he went to the police station, the station commander, the very same station commander who Ephraim Dlamini had also spoken to, didn't act on this. And, you know, he says the station commander merely said, no, we cannot open a case for you. This is political. We don't deal with political matters. Somebody from Bethlehem is going to come and open a case. I mean, which was quite disappointing for him. And he really... you know, at the end of his testimony, begged the commission to say, Chair, can you please protect us? Because we as whistleblowers in this, you know, are really suffering even up until this day. Let's take a listen to what he said, Blaine.
I will ask the commission, I think this is the last resort for us as whistleblowers and people on the ground to speak to. And may we please the commission look at one of the specific things, so the harassment that the whistleblowers get is not just the physical one. These things goes deep, and it puts the lives of the people who speak out at risk. And in most of the time, then we live in fear, and it's not good to live in fear in a democratic country, as if we are a lawlessness country. I think that the commission may please look onto that thing. It doesn't affect individual as such alone. It also affects people who are close to the individual who are speaking out. That will be my humble plea to the commission.
Yeah, Mangoba, the protection of whistleblowers, the safety of whistleblowers is key here. The commission has heard, I mean, the intended beneficiaries, one of the witnesses were talking about the death threats that they receive. So safety, a huge concern. And correct me if I'm wrong, the Deputy Chief Justice, the Chair, wants a report with regards to some of these cases that have been handed over to police, correct?
That's correct, Blaine. In fact, he did make ask the commission officials to look into this again. You recall that even when the previous witnesses, the beneficiaries testified, he had also asked the commission officials, the legal representatives, to make sure that they look into this issue of, police simply not doing anything about this. So again, he reiterated that yesterday, and he says, I want you directly as legal representatives to, to follow this up. Don't delegate to somebody else. I want a report on all of these matters, because it's really concerning, he says, the fact that, somebody would report, especially such a serious matter of their lives being threatened, and police will simply not do anything. So he definitely wants this matter investigated, and, and he wants answers on it, and why, this has not been done. And of course, also saying that those who need to be protected will need to be to be given resources to protect them.
Then we had Willie Basson coming on the stand. There were some issues with regards to the interpretation. The evidence leader was seemingly getting frustrated because what she was getting from the interpreter wasn't correlating. But what stood out for you from Mr. Basson's testimony?
Well, of course, Plain. I mean, he was one of the construction companies that was hired at the farm. And I think his role was to build dams where the cattle will be able to drink water, to drink from. And he testified the effect that, when he arrived at the farm, there was nothing in place. Even the company that had hired him, EG Construction, didn't have any machinery. And of course, he had to come with his own machinery. But interestingly, Plain, he then, for the first time, placed the Gupta family, or the Gupta brothers, as being there at the construction site. You recall that, at the farm itself, during construction, when the boilers, he says, when the milk processing, tanks were arriving. And he says, he met the 3 Gupta brothers there. And how he puts it, he says, I met the 3 Guptas. And then the chair asked, okay, which Guptas? He says, no, the Guptas that everybody knows from the Guptas from the newspapers. So, by saying that, we can all imagine or assume that he's speaking about the 3 Gupta brothers, which is interesting because, they've never directly been, linked to this Dairy Estina project. It was through that company that's linked to them, Estina, but to say that they were there on the scene, kind of suggests that they might have had a bigger role to play.
He's going to continue testimony today?
Of course.
With a new interpreter?
Yes, he's continuing his testimony as we speak, Plain. And of course, we expect 2 other witnesses to also take the stand. A former director at National Treasury.
These are live visuals among
those are live visuals. As you can see, he's back on the stand with the new interpreter. Of course, we're hoping that, this time around, his testimony will go smooth because, he's going to speak on a number of issues. But also, a former director at National Treasury is expected to testify. Of course, they investigated this issue in 2013 and compiled a report, a damning report, which found that tender or procurement processes had been flouted, and that the municipality didn't follow proper procedures insofar as this project was concerned. And then after that, we're also expecting an agricultural economist, Mr. David Marie, to take the stand. Okay, we're going to go shortly to the inquiry, but thank you very much indeed for your reporting. Mangoba Mqunu reporting on the Estina leg of testimony at the state capture inquiry.